What I'm going to do real quick is tell you a little bit about Palm Springs Landfill. This is a project that's for us it's been a real success story in that we've been able to take a landfill that was a dangerous setting for the local public in terms of sharp objects, exposed trash and debris and things like that. In the center part of Palm Springs, very close to, you can see the airport there, and this unused piece of property there, people had cut across the property and used it basically as a personal place to dispose of junk and trash, and with the winds and the sand blowing, it was just really an eyesore out there. You can see there's some homes around the perimeter. I'm going to give you a little bit of a look here. Keep note of this picture here. You can see there's kind of a scarp and this ridge. That's the landfill under there, and it was not well designed. It operated for about 35 years, beginning in the early 1930s. It's about almost 37 acres. Part of it was owned by the city of Palm Springs, and part of it was privately owned land. Had been vacant, and literally you could see those trails throughout the property. People were just walking across it and parking on it, and guys out there drinking beer and whatever was happening. So it was a great candidate for this. Not to mention that the material that was placed in this landfill was relatively inert. It was construction debris, some municipal trash, but after being in such an arid climate and being out of use for so many years, it had certainly gone to sleep. Kind of an overview here. Part of the landfill had some sewage treatment operations. They spread the sewage, and then once it was desiccated, they took the remnants of that and used it for agricultural purposes. And so that wasn't a big operation. That was live for a short period of time. Some of the hazardous materials that were out there, like most landfills, lead was the kicker. Everything was tested for out there, and we found that lead was a driving force. Anywhere where there were other contaminants, lead was present. So that was really a great means for us to be able to use lead as our driver for the cleanup. And wherever the lead was, and we knew that where the lead wasn't, we knew that it could be it was in clean soil and clean material. It offered some unique geotechnical problems for development because of the fact that the landfill material could not be compacted that well in theory. And it turns out that thanks to Brett and his geotechnical folks, they were able to cross that bridge quite successfully. The air resources in South Coast region, we had to deal with some NOx issues on the heavy equipment during the period of operation. Had to work through, I'll talk about the regulatory issues in a minute, but had to work through trading money with the regulatory agencies, and I had to move pretty quick because the land value issues and loans and rates and the money part of it was a real driver in how fast it needed to move. And then one thing that was of great significance is no city or municipal or state money was used to do this project. This is kind of a funny looking octopus, but in talking about partnerships, which is the reason we're here today, there are a lot of things that happen in redeveloping a landfill. Ultimately, you've got to have an end use for the property, and you've got to have someone that actually glues this thing together and maintains the operations and keeps the thing moving through time. And so that's what we've got here, the program director at the bottom. But then you've got to have someone who's willing to be the proponent, and that usually ends up being a developer or an investor. It could be one and the same. That's why I've got the arrow there. But then all the other components need to work into this thing: the regulatory, legal aspects, CEQA, technical, insurance, and then in this case, with most landfills, the geotechnical, which is a very important component. In considering these things to see if they're going to work, you got to look at the economy, who's going to be your oversight agency, how complete has the investigation been done, and do you have a plan that's actually going to work and is feasible and isn't going to cost more than the value of the property in the end. Some of the other considerations are the implementation process. How are you going to develop the property? Can you actually develop on the landfill? Are you going to have deed restrictions or other restrictions for that? Can you get the money in time? Who's going to pay for it? Who's going to be responsible for what aspects of the project? And then getting into the formal redevelopment once the land is ready to go. For the economic portion, you need to look at what the clean value of the land is in that area, and can you get a depressed property or a property that's considered by many to be upside down back into the arena where it makes economic sense. What are your development costs? What's the value of the dollar at the time? Your funding, your financing, so forth. Can you get insurance on something that's could be a behemoth and a lot of risk? And can you move into the future land use part of this? And then there's all those other unknowns, the risk factors and the contingencies that you got to consider up front. When you go to look for the oversight agency, that's one of the complicated issues that we found. We went to integrated waste, we went to the county, we went to the water board, and we ended up at the DTSC. And the reason the DTSC ended up overseeing this was that they were, at the time, there was a big push for brownfield type redevelopment projects. They had a mechanism in place for funding through the voluntary cleanup agreements, and they had available staff that they could dedicate to this. And I know that the tide is moving in the direction where Integrated Waste, the Water Board, and the DTSC will all be able to, well, they have equal authority, but they'll be able to oversee these kinds of things. And that's at least what we're seeing from the outside. Does the agency have a technical understanding? Do they support these kinds of programs? Are they going to be a team player? Because when you go into one of these things, you lay all your cards on the table. You show them the economics. You show them every part of it. And can they really be part of that team, or are they going to slow it down, or are they going to be an impediment to getting one of these things done? And it turned out that in this case, the DTSC was very cooperative and quite helpful. Then you sit down and you actually get to the plan. Once the concept's in place, everyone's at the table, everyone agrees it can work, you start working through the details of the plan. You lay out the budget, you lay out the time scale, and you work forward. And I use the term iterative here because the feasibility evaluation, a lot of things happen at once. There's the CEQA, there's the land use, there's the actual remediation component of the plan, there's the local public, and all these things happen at once. And so as you change a little here, you got to tweak a little over there. And that's kind of the hard part is managing all these things concurrently and making sure that on that start day, you've got all those boxes checked off. There's a point here I added. Moving the landfill material outside the original footprint kind of constitutes a new landfill. So one of the kickers here was maintaining, keeping everything within the footprint of the original landfill. And so that was what made the redevelopment plan very complicated. The air emissions, like I talked about, the heavy equipment had NOx reduction equipment on it. The excavation replacement operations, basically what we really needed, which would have made it nice if we could have lifted up the landfill material, done all our work, and then put it back down. But there was a lot of flip-flopping, and anytime you move earth twice, it costs you a lot more money. We had to deal with wind, weather, storms, all the runoff issues, dust control, and then ultimately now we're working through the last component of that issue. That's the landfill gas collection system. Some of the contingencies we had to deal with were things like the U.S. military. They used to use the airport that's adjacent to the property, and that was one of their auxiliary landing strips in case some of the coastal regions were taken out. They could bring in supplies and so forth there. Well, they had these chemical agent test kits that they had 2 of those kits, and they thought they might have ended up in the landfill. So all of a sudden, we were dealing with the Corps of Engineers and dealing with what we might do when we find or disrupt one of these test kits, that mustard gas and chloropicrin and all these kinds of interesting things that are in vials. Didn't end up finding any of those. Getting back to the land use issues, and you can see the picture that's kind of washed out behind here. That's a picture showing, this is a stack of the landfill material. This here is a little canopy where you can see someone standing there. And then we've graded down, it almost looks like a mine operation. This represents the edge of the cell where the landfill material resides, and it ends up now being in the center of the property under deed restriction, and around the perimeter of the property is the development, which includes Home Depot, Kohl's, and a lot of mainstream vendors and so forth. The geotechnical issue was resolved because once the scraper started moving the material, the blending and homogenization that occurred allowed us to achieve 90-95% of compaction on that material, and because the predominant quantity of that stuff was inert, it really worked out well. Tenant requirements, Home Depot, Kohl's are very, very strict about what they can do and how much risk they can take on. So with respect to who takes ownership over those risks at the end, those things had to be dealt with throughout the entire project. Mitigations that are going in place, landfill collection system or gas collection system. There's basically small systems, each one to be monitored, one over the landfill material, and then subsystems within the buildings. And then also the insurance policy for managing the long-term liability. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Brett, and he's going to talk about a couple other ones and some of the developer-related complications.